Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. Sitting here Sunday morning, we get honestly some wild news coming out of Norman, Oklahoma late Saturday night. Defensive coordinator Zac Alley leaving this Oklahoma program, joining the West Virginia coaching staff. Here's my initial take, and I really think there's kind of two different conversations you got to have with this news. One, what's going on inside the walls of Oklahoma, which is certainly a concern. I mean, you look at Zac Alley, it was 4 months ago, and he was talking about Brent Venables being his second dad. And now, after the defense had a very good year with a tough SEC schedule, he's leaving the Oklahoma program when it was clearly going in the right direction. So I think first, for lack of better terms, a vibe check for this Oklahoma program needs to take place. And then secondly, where does Oklahoma go at the defensive coordinator spot? There's a lot of buzz around just kind of elevating within, which to an extent makes sense. You got a lot of veteran guys on this defensive staff that certainly are capable of taking over the defense. But I also think there's a question of, hey, do you want to get a guy in where Brent Venables maybe can relinquish a little bit of control of the defense and focus on running this program, which is probably where Brent Venables needs to focus on. I mean, when you look at especially head coaching in this modern era of college football, like maintaining your roster with this transfer portal era, doing all this NIL stuff, there's a lot more to running a program like Oklahoma than just X's and O's. And so where does Oklahoma go from here on the defensive side of the football? That's a separate conversation. Now, I'll start with my take. From a vibes check situation, it's not good. Like, I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat the optics of this move. Now, I do think the optics are a lot worse than what it is in reality. You know, I think this move kind of signifies that you kind of know Brent Venables is still the guy running this defense, which should be the expectation. You look at BV, why did he get the job at Oklahoma? One of the biggest reasons was, I mean, he's one of, if not the best defensive minds that you see in all of college football. So do I think it's a disaster for this Oklahoma defense? No, absolutely not. Now, optically, that's kind of a different conversation. Optically, for me, there's a lot of like alarm bells going off in my head about what's going on with this Oklahoma program going into 2025. And the scariest conversation to me is Zac Alley leaving Oklahoma because of job security. Like, there's a really real conversation that if it does not go right in 2025, Brent Venables is not going to be coaching this team in 2026, which means Zac Alley is looking for another job. That's probably the biggest concern. I want to get your take. I think more importantly, I'd like to get the Oklahoma fans' takes in the comment section too. A lot of different ways you could look at it. Now, before we get into more of the conversation, I do want to say to the Oklahoma fans, it's been a blast talking this program. It's been a roller coaster over the last 12 months. The amount of support y'all continue to show, the good, the bad. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section. Dill, I'll give you the T-box. Let's start with the vibes check. What are the feelings for you around this Oklahoma program heading into this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, this move, you kind of said it. I don't take it as a good sign. And you saw the tumultuous nature of the season. You saw Brent Venables, I feel like, blaming some other coaches, especially on the offense side of the ball.
Which was fair to an extent.
No, and it's certainly there's an element of fairness. But I do think if you're the head coach, you'd probably like to see him just taking that responsibility. And he kind of did. I didn't hire the right guy. Whatever was about it. But that probably wasn't. You didn't love seeing it. It did feel like there was a little bit of finger pointing. And then, I mean, the defense was awesome. So that's why it's a little surprising to me that Zac Alley's leaving. But I think you said it right. Zac Alley's a young coach who, again, hasn't really built up that reputation yet where he's gets an immediate job like Oklahoma if Brent Venables isn't around.
That's what I'm wondering. It's like when you're the defensive coordinator for Oklahoma under Brent Venables, it's almost like being the offensive coordinator under a guy like Lincoln Riley, where it's like, how much are you building your resume of coaching when you're under a guy like Brent Venables on the defensive side of the football? And that might be a conversation of why Zac Alley decided to go to West Virginia. Again, this is not a knock on West Virginia. Like, I'm kind of high on what Rich Rod can do there. And it makes sense that Zac Alley, one, you kind of hear the vibes, all right, maybe he takes over the West Virginia job when Rich Rod decides to retire. That certainly could be a conversation. But I think more importantly, you go to West Virginia, you take over the defense. It's your defense, and you get ownership over that. And I think that might be what Zac Alley's looking for, because the reality is, as the DC at Oklahoma under Brent Venables, you're not going to have ownership of the defense. And I don't think anybody will look at that Oklahoma defense and give you as much credit. I mean, the credit's going to go to Brent Venables and what he's doing with the defense. So that could be an explanation towards why this is happening. My biggest concern is Oklahoma sounded like they wanted him back. This is not like, oh, we'll let him walk. It's not a big deal. Like they tried to pony up for him. They made a strong pitch for him, and it wasn't enough to keep him from going to West Virginia. To me, that's my biggest concern, because you look at, I mean, some of the most important aspects of being a successful head coach. You go to guys like Nick Saban, Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart. One of the things they do an exceptional job at is, at some points, you want your assistant coaches to get elevated and take jobs moving up. You know, a lot of Nick Saban's coordinators took head coaching jobs after his time at Alabama, but you don't want them taking lateral jobs. You don't want them leaving the program. You know, Dan Lanning's done a massive job retaining his staff. Kirby Smart has held on to Glenn Schumann. I don't know how he's done it, but he's done it. You know, so retaining your staff, retaining your good staff is really important. And Zac Alley, when it's clearly going in the right direction on the defensive side of the football, leaving to go to West Virginia.
But that's where the program taught, like, because again, like the defense certainly is moving in the right direction. I think there still are some questions around the offense side of the ball. And if Oklahoma doesn't win enough games, then Zac Alley's not moving up. The offensive coordinator spots aren't moving up. Like that to me is the crux of it, is like, again, they need to win. They need to be a better team on the field. And it's not just about having one good unit. Like you want to be part of a winning program, because that's at the end of the day how you move up. And this year was just really disappointing from a bigger picture kind of situation with this Oklahoma program.
Yeah, I would guess that that's probably the biggest reason. Like the ownership of the defense is probably one, and then secondly, just a little bit of concern about job security. You know, because I don't think it's crazy to talk 12 months from now. We're talking about Oklahoma having a new head coach. Now, the second conversation is, where does Oklahoma go from here? I think there's a couple obvious answers. One, hiring internally. Dill, I want to get your take on that first. I don't hate it, because I do think there are very qualified coaches on this Oklahoma staff that can take over this defense and kind of have that partnership with BV. And I think one of the reasons this Oklahoma defense took a massive step in the right direction in 2024 is there wasn't much conflict. You know, Brent Venables brought in a guy that wants to play Brent Venables defense, versus with Ted Roof a couple of years ago, there you could tell it's like that doesn't feel like the Brent Venables defense. You see like at times, but not always. Hiring from within, one, I think helps the continuity of this defense. And I think secondly, it kind of maintains that fluid relationship between what Brent Venables wants on defense and what the defensive coordinator wants as well. Well, I guess, what are your takes on hiring internally if you're Oklahoma?
I probably would want a guy who's a little bit more experienced. I want a big time name. I want a guy who can run that side of the ball. Because at the end of the day, even you look like successful head coaches like a Ryan Day. I mean, he's not running the offense anymore.
Yeah.
Even you look at a guy like Kirby Smart, he's hiring really good defensive coordinators, and they're kind of running the show. It's pretty clear. And in just looking at some of the more over the top chaos or overhead chaos, if you will, in this year for Oklahoma, I kind of wouldn't mind seeing Brent Venables probably step back to an extent from the defense and turn the keys over to somebody who can run it kind of more.
I think you're seeing coaches do that. You know, I think 10 years ago, when college football was a little bit more simple and being a head coach was it still was complicated back then, but it's a hell of a lot more complicated now. You saw guys like a Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma have success by, yeah, I'm the head coach, but I'm also running the offense. But you look in this modern era, and I think you made some really good points. You know, Kirby Smart, it lets Glenn Schumann really take command of this defense. Now, Kirby Smart's always going to have his hand in the pot, just like Brent Venables will always, because you don't want one of the best defensive minds not impacting the defense. Dan Lanning with Tosh Lupoy, probably another good example. Ryan Day going out and hiring a guy like Chip Kelly, kind of relinquishing the car to him. You're seeing coaches do that. I think it's because of how difficult it's become, how many moving parts there are to running a program.
And frankly, I'd probably feel a little bit differently if it felt like everything was a little more buttoned up in this Oklahoma
Agreed.
program. But
Yeah.
there are some very clear signs that there's some things that need to change from how they're evaluating guys, how they're retaining guys. Like there's
Yeah.
some things going on that I look at maybe Brent Venables does need to do a better job with it, just like Billy Napier probably had take a look in the mirror and give up some control of his offense, because I look like that wasn't a program that was exactly rolling the last couple of years. It was, again, they're kind of finding their footing, but I look like Oklahoma probably has some wood to chop in other areas more than just on the field in terms of what their defense has done. So I do think Brent Venables probably does need to take a step back and evaluate everything else, because there are some cracks.
Yeah. I do think it'd be worth, especially as a first year head coach with a program that is one of the biggest in the country. There's so much that needs to go into running this Oklahoma Sooners football program, and it almost feels like a guy like Brent Venables could benefit from taking a step back of the X's and O's, taking over the or kind of running the program a little bit more. I saw this on the message boards, and I really don't like it. Wes Goodwin, obviously familiarity with Brent Venables coming from Clemson. I think there's a really good chance Wes Goodwin's looking for a job this season. If you're Oklahoma, are you going to hire a guy that just significantly underperformed with a very good Clemson defense? Like, look, that Clemson defense was much better than the defense that they were putting out. That, to me, concerns me a little bit. Yes, it makes sense with the familiarity with Brent Venables, kind of similar to Zac Alley, but it's just a guy. The difference between Wes Goodwin and Zac Alley was completely turning around that Jacksonville State defense. Wes Goodwin, I don't think, is elevating this Clemson defense. So I don't necessarily love that. We'll see where they decide to go. My biggest thing is don't spare an expense. Like I'm hearing talks about Todd Bates would make more sense. It's cheaper. No, especially when you're coaching for your job. Like, you got to make sure you go out and get your guy to run this defense. That's my take on it. We'll obviously cover if they decide to go outside the program. We'll cover the names that emerge. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.